and thank you for joining us on Charting the Way Forward, where we deliver research-informed strategy and intelligence from across the Democratic coalition. This podcast is produced by Way to Win. I'm your host, Kerry Eleveld, and today I am joined by
Dan Ancona, a independent media consultant working with Way to Win.
All right. And I just want to say welcome, everyone. I mean, this is our first pod of the year. And due to scheduling conflict, I know, right? Yes, we're back. Kind of. It's in a smaller but really powerful form. No, we just, because of scheduling conflicts this week, and we're all like getting back in the grind and all that stuff, we're doing a kind of short and sweet pod today, a discussion about Way to Win's end of year research summary called Towards Strength, which encompasses all of our learnings on the year from 10 different studies, culminating in 5 distinct signals about the path forward for Democrats this year. Let's see, the New Republic covered it in an exclusive, and you can also now find it on our Substack called Charting the Way Forward as well. So you should subscribe to that. And while you're subscribing to that, you should subscribe to the pod. If you haven't subscribed to the pod, we have a lot of listeners who drink us in regularly, but Dan, they're not subscribed. Can you believe that?
Smash the subscribe button, everybody. Yes. Come on. I know.
Smash it.
They're annoying. You want to get to the good stuff, but the more you subscribe, the faster we get to it.
There you go. There we go. So, but today, basically, I'm just going to interview Dan about this research summary because he was one of the primary authors of it. And will be probably a little bit shorter and tighter than usual. But let's see if we can get into this a little bit. Dan, tell me the story of this project and how it came together.
Okay. And we'll see about the time. I don't know. I'm going to try to keep it quick. I might ramble. It's an interesting story. This project was actually born of my stupidity. I started out, I sort of proposed it. It popped into my head as a good piece of content for us to have. I thought it'd be easy. the stupid part.
Famous last words.
Bad context,
I remember thinking, I have a great idea for a book. I don't think I thought it would be easy, but I did think getting the proposal together for it would be relatively easy. One year later, I had a proposal.
So I was like, oh well, it's 10 studies. How hard could it? How much could it cost, Michael? $5. And I thought we would just list the 10 studies and like throw a little conclusion on there, throw some signals that we found out. Well, we started on this and realized that it was a much larger project than I thought. And I'd had some other priorities in my contracts that we sort of moved around and decided it was helpful and started to focus on it. And I sort of drafted the 5 signals and the sort of 3 big takeaways that came out of it. And it just sort of like the scope of it just kind of kept increasing. And we were like making lots of ads and like doing program during the election, and we're focused on the election. So it kind of put it off till after that. Well, I looked it back up. It was October 27th. Our fellow Democratic family researchers and operatives and strategists put out a huge report called Deciding to Win. And this was a huge report. Basically, I'm going to summarize it. I'm probably most of the people who are listening to our podcast have seen this. If you haven't, probably some of them haven't. It's called Deciding to Win. It's easily Googleable. I think it's decidingtowin.org or something. You can go look at their sort of argument, condensing it very, very greatly. Go ahead. Yeah.
I should say that there are a handful of other ones too, like that exists in, there's probably about roughly 5 other organizations who did something kind of similar from their own perspective and area of expertise. Please go ahead. I just wanted
this one. I think it's fair to say that objectively, this one made the biggest splash. This one was like, it generated the most amount of discourse. There were articles in major media, New York Times.
You mean deciding to win when you say this one,
right, that one,
not ours, but the deciding to win one. Yeah.
Right. So, so it was, and this is a week before the election, and they put out a report about how Dems lose because they're too far left. And I just so I've talked to some of these people now, and I just I've relayed this to them too, and on social media, that don't put out reports about why people don't vote for Dems during election season, please. Like, just please don't do that. We time everything to be after the election. First of all, it's more data to like find out how things go, and like especially in the fact where the results were so positive for Dems. If Dems were too far left before, but then they just cleaned up, what's going on there, right?
Well, I was going to say also, we don't agree with the conclusion. I mean, it's not
sure. No. Aside from that, right? We'll get there, but right. So the focus of this report is, and again, like they're going to maybe listen to this and like take issue with this, but the general argument and the way the argument gets summarized is that Dems are underperforming sort of chronically because they're perceived as too far left. And we realized in the process of having committed to my folly of, doing this research report already and like starting down this path and like starting to try to look at all these huge studies that we've done as a, as an aggregate, that we had a very different conclusion. Like, that's not what we found, right? Mainly when we went and talked to people, I mean, the way that we sort of broke it out was that there were sort of these three sort of like backdrop kind of sort of like observations about what's been happening, and then there were 5 signals that really came directly out of the research. But like, when this is the main thing, like the sort of backdrop was that like it had to do with people really frustrated about the economy, and that was not as simple as being mad about prices, but that was a lot of it. They really wanted change, and this is one of the actual signals out of there. But then all this was happening in this context of massive right-wing media advantage, and like right-wing, not just their well-documented advantages on social media and in long form, particularly that was podcasts and long YouTubes were a huge area of advantage for them. And then there was this last piece that was like movement alignment, and looking back over historical election results, when more lefty voters are on board with the campaign, or as one of my favorite focus group participants said, well, on the hype train, right? He was like, in 2020 there was a hype train, in 2024 there was not so much of a hype train. Mm-hmm. When those things are aligned, it just Dems tend to do better, right? And it's not that there's like a huge group of like leftier voters that can be activated or deactivated necessarily, or that need to be appealed to or need to be appeased. It's a lot more complicated than that. I mean, there are, we've talked on this podcast at length before about the sort of 3D land view of the electorate and how there are groups of voters that come into and out of it. So a swing right in the two-way vote might just mean that the leftier voters stayed home, right? And there's a lot of evidence suggesting that's exactly what happened in 2024. But just generally in the media environment, if you don't have people who are excited about your candidacy, who are out there making the case, the people who are the more engaged people, that one person in the friend group who is the political one, right? If that person is like, yeah, I guess Kamala, I don't know, or says something like, I want to vote for Kamala, but I'm, not sure she's going to deliver change, and I'm not sure that, about her position on Gaza, that is drag on your campaign, and it's that does hurt you. It's not as simple as well, the issue of this salience or whatever, but it's not a linear thing. It's much more of a sort of how voters think, a kind of persuasion thing. So against these three things, against like the sort of real economic frustrations and the media advantage and the movement alignment, that was sort of our sort of like backdrop overview of things. The 5 things that we really found, and we really tried to like, I mean, this is a lot of, we were lucky that we got to work with these amazing research people. We worked with like Molly Murphy at Impact, and Luke Martin there at Impact Research was a super well-trusted firm inside, in the Congress. People use them all the time. Celinda Lake, who is an icon of like Democratic polling, and actually works with Republicans too. She's not a entirely just a Democratic poll. She's done a lot of like cross-partisan stuff too. Those were some of the people. We also did like a little poll, just like we used Pollfish, which is a sort of self-serve thing. We worked with YouGov on one poll. Like, it was like we've gotten to work with a lot of really interesting and fun tools and people. And the other sort of a lot of our studies came out of, and I think 3 of them sort of relied on this, was we work with Swayable. We work with an online ad testing platform that does randomized control trials. We don't use that as sort of like as like the beginning and end of our process for deciding what we need to talk about, what the issues are. But like we definitely there's no better way, we still think, to sort of figure out how you can move people towards a position than by making a good persuasive 30-second ad and seeing how it does. So we did a couple of those too last cycle, but out of all of those, these 5 signals that we came up with were voters and I'm just going to run through these quickly and then maybe we can talk about them more. But voters really want to change, and this is like this. Let me run through them really quick first. They really want to change. The message just didn't land. Democrats are not doomed.
Can you just go 1? They really want to change.
1,
2,
they really want to change.
Yeah.
2, they did not find the voters did not find the message broadly persuasive. We saw this again and again.
Specifically, the economic message, Democrats' economic message.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, and I'll get into more of these. 3, Democrats are not doomed. There's lots of barriers to Democrats. Cynicism is the biggest one. Lingering right-wing beliefs about like government is bad for the economy, that kind of thing. Lots of things still out there that are big issues. And then the 5th one is that, we really believe that looking at all of this through an ideological lens, and we saw this time and time again, just voters, like, they have this perception of left and right a little bit, but if you dig down into it, there's the converse famous 1964, study of this, that all of this goes back to. Voters do not generally have a stable understanding of ideology, especially when you get down to the issue level. If you ask them to identify what's a more left issue, what's a more right issue, it just gets real messy real fast. And it's not that they're dumb. They're just like, we found again and again talking to, I'm always amazed actually when we do focus groups, like how smart people are. Like, they're just like, they understand their own lives really well. They understand what the campaigns are telling them, but they don't have, like, just having like an ideological construct is for online people and political scientists, right? There's like, and there are a lot of people online, but even a lot of people online, you see a left versus right thing. Sometimes people are like, no, that's backward. They don't. It's not.
We did a lot of qualitative, and you never heard, you and I, since we did, we not only listened to those focus groups, but then put them into, turned them into podcast form. And you just never hear anybody say, well, I just wish that Democrats weren't as progressive or as liberal, or or even
right.
I don't
sometimes,
know. I think sometimes what I heard was sometimes what I heard people say was, I think that turned off some people. Like, they play pundit, you know what I mean?
Yeah, much more. Right.
And rarely did they even, on some of the more hot button issues, like, that we got pilloried on, like trans issues and immigration, did you hear someone that we, in qualitative say, well, I just wish that they were much more conservative on, immigration or something like that. But anyway, it just doesn't, it doesn't play like that in their mind, to your point. So
exactly. Yeah. I just want to add like show notes in here. Kerry helped with all this stuff too, right? So this is a good discussion because Kerry was in there, like, helping us sort all this stuff out. We're a pretty small team, right? And what we found in doing this research is, like, we all get different things out of it. And the more of us listen to a focus group, and we have a group chat going, like, well, we're in the focus group, we get different things jump out of people, and it's too many people paying attention to it makes it really hard. But just having the right amount, we have a really good research team that's been doing this stuff, and Kerry's part of it. So this is
thank you.
She's going gonzo here. So, right.
All right. Yeah. I'm just throwing stuff against the wall and seeing what sticks. So
So yeah, the ideology thing, it's just like, it's just, you can't put too much stock in it. And I just want to add one more thing about the report. So it's got these signals, and it's got a bunch of details about these signals, and stuff about the media environment, and stuff about what voters believed. And then it goes into the 10 studies that they're all linked in here. There's a lot of detail. There's a lot of charts, and like, if I'd had even more time, I would have taken each chart and like used it to illustrate a story, which I respect to the Designing to Win people. I thought they did a great job with that. I was actually inspired by that. They really took the data and used it to illustrate their points in a clear way. We kind of threw a lot of this stuff together. There's all the data's in there. If people really want to dig in, they can, and they should. And go, listening to our back issues of our podcast is actually a good way to get a summary of the data without having to dig into all of it. But there's 2 things in here in the appendix that that I thought were sort of interesting. We dug into some sort of long-term, the ANES, the American National Electoral Survey, is a sort of gold standard public opinion, data about that goes back pretty far, 50s, I think, maybe not quite that far. That we looked at moderates and where what the composition of moderates were in each party, or self-identified moderates, and there's a lot of research on sort of how moderates think of themselves. David Brookman has an amazing study on this, where it's like, what gets coded as moderate oftentimes in these things as well. This person holds a very extreme view on LGBTQ and a very extreme view on income inequality, and they just sort of get mushed together, right? So, and that becomes a moderate, right?
Wow.
It's like,
Wow.
I think gay people should be imprisoned and rich people should, have all their money taken from them. Oh, that person's a moderate,
Right.
it's just like one artifact of how the surveys are constructed.
Wow.
But for people who just on a self-ID'd question of moderate, if you ask people, are you more liberal, more conservative, are you moderate? There's 1.5 times as many of them in the Democratic Party, and it's been growing actually. So that's the very counter to this. There was one little data point. Actually, it was the data point that David Shore started his deck with, was that moderates are leaving the Democratic Party, and it just doesn't, in the long-term data. There's a blip a little bit that over the past couple of years that they haven't. But really, what's mainly been happening is that people are sort of depolarizing from both parties, and particularly from the Democrats. A lot of people are registering as independents and not registering as Dems, even though they lean Dem, and that there's been very little structural discussion at all in the party. And to the degree that like moderation and a seeming moderate and being focused on constantly seeming moderate or constantly seeming right wing in a lot of cases makes that process harder of 18 to 25-year-olds knowing what the party is for, or even younger than that, 16 or 17-year-olds knowing what the party is for and what it stands for. Those trade-offs haven't been explored at all really in the larger strategy.
Go for it. Just for our listeners who David Shore, I mean, a lot of our listeners will know, and some of them won't, is the principle of Blue Rose, right? And and they're the pollster that did almost, all of the informing of Future Forward, which was the biggest, pound for pound, dollar for dollar PAC by far, working on behalf of Kamala Harris's campaign. So I just wanted to contextualize that for some people in case it kind of slipped through. Anyway.
Yep. So the other thing that's in there is, and that's actually one of the questions that we've gotten from listeners, is like, who are all these people? Who are we talking about? So it's helpful to, at some point, I think we'll talk about that even more at some point. And I just want to like, again, sort of reiterate, we started out this way, like these are people inside the Democratic family. We think they're operating in good faith. We disagree with them, right? But we all sometimes we go to each other's meetings and get on each other's calls and have this discussion. And it's a big discussion. We're really like, when people say the Democratic family, that's Simon Rosenberg's term. I love it because it's like a family. So it's like your family. Right? So,
at Thanksgiving,
there's probably a lot you guys disagree on, right? That's how we are too, So
yeah.
So the other thing that was in this appendix was something about, it was a thread that I'd had a while ago about how voters understand and make decisions about politics, and it kind of took off a little bit. I have a tiny bit of juice on Blue Sky, and it's got a couple hundred likes or something, which is like good for me. And I was like, okay, I should break this out. But like I feel like this is sort of what our friends in the broader Democratic family get wrong a lot, right? Is like how voters make decisions. Like there's this sort of linear approach that they have. Like they talk about median voters, they talk about, raising the salience of this or that issue, right? And in our experience, and in my experience, like not just doing research and working on persuasion and working on these, like on all this sort of high level stuff, but in my experience, going back to being an organizer, knocking on doors, I'm not going to say how many decades ago, now some number of decades that's bigger than one, like, a long time ago in Santa Barbara, when I first started out, is like, it's not that like people don't like look at all the issues from a candidate and decide based on linear algebra of like what issues they're closer to. That's just not how it works. It's vibes, it's narrative. So much of it is around narrative. It's like, what is the story of each candidate? And like Trump's story this cycle was like, I'm going to change things. I'm going to mess up the system, right? And Harris's was, I see you want the system to change, but what would I change? I don't know.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure about that.
And
That
ad, I mean,
yes,
that was the ad that we heard back from people so much more than the trans one, although the trans one fit into that same narrative,
it did.
right? Was that like that their Democrats' priorities are wrong. And it wasn't, this is, again, we've said this a bunch of times. Kerry has been super strong about this too. It's not that, and now we've seen this since the Virginia results. It's not that people all of a sudden became anti-trans, right? It's just like,
or anti-queer, anti-LGBT,
or any of that. Like there has been a little motion around the edges, which is bad because only one side has been making this argument, right? Yeah. And like ultimately, who's making these arguments? Like voters believe all kinds of stuff, right? Like if you go ask a voter about, there's a story I'm going to skip. There was a story where I had a conversation.
We're worried about where this is
conversation.
We're cutting this, Dan. We're cutting this story. Totally. No, I'm just kidding.
There was a conversation that I had with a voter who was a family member of a good friend. I'm not going to get into the details, but like it was, you will hear if you just go talk to someone about an issue, you will hear all sorts of issues about immigration. Like you will have someone go from some variant of great replacement theory to, well, I just think we should make the like legal pathways easier, like in 2 sentences, and like,
yes,
that's how people's brains work, like there's a ton of research on this, like that's just it. So when you make arguments for the other side, when you run an ad like Sherrod Brown did, where he spent $7 million saying, I'm voting for the most conservative, this is the most conservative immigration bill in decades, you are saying your opponents are right. You are strengthening those beliefs in your strength. You think about it like as their actual neural patterns. I do not have a degree in neuroscience. I have friends who do, and they agree. Like, talk to Anat. She's the person who explains this better than I do, right? You're strengthening actual physical patterns of neurons that fire together, they're wired together, right? When you tell a story, that's actually what you're doing. You're changing people's brains. And like, that is, you have to start from that. And like, it's the same lesson from research and from neuroscience as it is from just going on knocking on doors and talking to people, right? It's like, or being at meetings with people and hearing how they went. That like that is so important. That's so critical about how people
also work. Not only did they reinforce by running ads like that, not only do you reinforce what Republicans are saying and that whole thing, but you're also letting them define what the terms of the debate are. Totally. And Democrats let Republicans define down the terms of the debate to being around the southern border, and that's it. And immigration is a huge issue. And it was like Democrats just stopped talking about anything but the southern border. Pathway to citizenship just fell out. And, all these other, H-1B visas and, any number of issues. But yeah. And so you're doing two things at once.
Sure. No. And one of the things that we actually have data from our ads from 2024 that as soon as I finish it up, we're going to have another post on this, where I went back and looked at, we can make in Swayable. It's really easy to make a leaderboard of all the different ads across horse race or mobilization or all the different questions that we ask or with different demographic groups. And we never got around to posting these last year. Now that we're thinking about what to talk about in 2026, it's a little more relevant. So we're going to post that soon. The number one ad that we had was actually an immigration ad, like kind of like by a lot with a bunch of different groups and across, sort of registered voters, general population, and with white working class was like, it was just a pure sort of social proof based ad. I don't know if we've even talked about this on the podcast before. It was called Playbook.
I'm pretty sure we played Playbook at one point.
Maybe we did.
I do. I couldn't tell you which episode, but
yeah. But it's and maybe we'll drop it in here. I don't know. I think we played it before. It's going to be in this blog post because we wanted to write it inside the framework of what the Democratic and Kamala Harris, approach to immigration was. It wasn't making a policy prescription. It was just saying, look, we're not going to do mass deportations. We're not going to spend gazillions of dollars on what ended up happening and what's happening now and what so many people are opposed to, right? Like it was so from a policy wise perspective, it was the same thing that the Democrats were talking about as comprehensive immigration reform, but it was just a very different argument, and it was an attack on Trump for saying crazy things about immigration then, and look what happened. So it's frustrating to watch all this now and know that different choices made during the 2024 campaign would have made this much harder. And this is ultimately why, sometimes I get why people are frustrated with these discussions, these endless discussions about like Democratic strategy and going back and forth. Like there's like, how big is the audience for this really? But like these questions really, really matter. It's theater with lights, and like it's really this is why we're here. So.
Before we let people get too frustrated, there were some hopeful notes in this thing. Can we hit some of the? I mean, what was most hopeful to you about coming out of writing this research summary?
I mean, I think that the opposition that we've tracked to this kind of immigration reform, even though it wasn't on the top line, there was like all through last year, like mass deportation was at like 52 or like 55, right? And
support. You're talking about support,
right? Yeah. And for sure, some of that is because there was literally no counter argument happening at a high level from anyone, right? Schumer and Jeffries have made this decision that they can't talk about immigration, right? Like we're trying to shift that. We're trying so hard to shift that. And I think like even with that on the baseline now, I think if you dug into that and if you looked at the support outside of the half-ish, fewer today, but even last year, half of Republicans are MAGA. I usually use that it bounces around, but I use that as a sort of general heuristic. I think that support wasn't at 52% in that group of gettable voters, right? So it's an issue that Democrats could talk about. But even having it at 52, I get is not ideal, right? Like 52% of Americans being in favor of mass deportation is bad. Yeah, that number now is finally down. I mean, you had the data that the polling for abolish ICE, which is sort of the hardest version of that, right, has gone from like 20 to like 40, like 2 or something,
it's gone up. A support for abolishing ICE, which still isn't above water according to Civics polling, but it's gone up like 22, 23 points over the past year.
Huge.
And the other thing is that just the implementation, which we were on the front end of realizing that there was starting to be a big separation between support for Trump's policies on immigration versus how they were being implemented. I mean, I think the problem is that once you saw them being implemented, you realized how horrific the policy actually was, but that was going downhill and was working against Trump. And now we're in a situation, in the aftermath of, and I don't even think we've seen the definitive polling on this yet, in the aftermath of this tragic killing of a 35-year-old mother in Minneapolis.
For us to get we'll get a read on public opinion,
but
it's for people to get the polls out written and out in the field, and
But we don't have anything definitive in the aftermath, but we already do know based on YouGov polling released this week that support for ICE has gone down. Just to support. I'm not talking about abolishing ICE. I'm just talking about support for ICE. I think they're underwater now, and they've gone, or at least they're underwater. They're not underwater with Republicans, but they're definitely underwater with independents, and they're underwater with Democrats by a lot. Yeah. And support for them overall has gone down 20 to 30 points or something like that. So,
and there's a core of really intense opposition to it too, which, we talked about with sort of, with movement alignment, that people out there making those arguments, people showing up in the streets, people doing all these things that they're doing, that's the Indivisible folks got 10,000 or something events like in 48 hours after they posted a thing.
Wow.
Doing this. So like it's there's a lot of, ambient anger out there. Okay. Getting back to hope. Like, this is weird to say this, but I think the fact that the message just didn't land in 2024 is is sort of weirdly hopeful. And there was there was a narrative moment that I sort of uncovered. It was actually, so one of the studies that we did was TV Congress, where we get the database of all the ads from there's a firm called Ad Impact that does amazing work doing this, and they provide it. We're customers of theirs, and they give us the whole database at the end, and then we can crunch it and make all these reports from it. And it was as I was writing the memo for that I realized there was this moment of almost Shakespearean drama that happened in the campaign that, like, I think is like illustrative of like, this is actually hopeful. The New York Times Siena poll that had the change number that we kind of start the signals with, even though it wasn't our data, it was still such a clear signal. And it was so important. And we heard this from people over and over and over. So it was, but this was the best quantitative version of it, was the percentage of Americans who wanted change was 96 to 2. There were 2% thought the system was working well. 96, everybody else, 2% weren't sure. 2% weren't sure. Right? 96%
in 2024. Just to be clear,
that came out on October 8th, 2024. Yeah. Okay,
right.
In that poll, Harris also had a narrow lead on which candidate is do you think is more for change, right?
That was wild.
That same day, October 8th, was the day that she went on The View and gave the answer when they asked her, what would you change from what Biden had done? That was the day that she gave the answer. She said, I'm not sure. Or I forget what it was. I forget exactly what she said. It was,
yeah.
I don't want to
I can't think of anything or something like that.
But it was the clip that got used then. It took them a couple of weeks to make, it took the Trump MAGA people a couple of weeks to see it in their data or whatever, to like realize that was a huge misstep. Then they put it in an ad, and that was the ad that then we heard from a lot of people, like voters later, that was that in terms of actually shifting votes and either depressing people and keeping them from staying home or persuading them to vote for Trump. Like, that ad seemed to have the most damage of anything, just from a narrative and overall level, more damaging. Like I said earlier, the trans ad sort of fit into that narrative, but it was but that was the ad that, like, people they brought up and mentioned, right? And let's, like, for people who think paid media doesn't have any effect anymore, we hear it all the time from people when we go talk to them. Like, they'll either say the words of an ad, like, almost verbatim, or like they'll bring up the topic of it, right? Because we think ads are a good proxy for what campaigns want their campaigns to be about.
Well, and in the they them ad, Harris was also saying things in her own words. So quoting her, I think, made it doubly effective in a way.
Yeah.
I know you're going to push back on that, but like it, people ended up telling us in our research that they thought she was out of touch with what, this was the most important part of the trans ads, and what came out of that was that they believed she was out of touch and didn't understand what was most important to them because she was too focused on other stuff. One of them being trans issues.
Sure. And not pushing back on that, but it's just amazing to me that that use of a candidate's voice in an ad can backfire so easily. The Clinton campaign had a big strategy there was data on this. This is when I was just getting involved in advertising and research.
Back in 1950.
There was a bunch of data on this. This was in 2017-ish, right? This came out. Wait, sorry, what did you say?
I said back in 1950.
I totally right. When I was studying under Philip Converse, right? So in 2017, when I was like looking, I was like, I'd been a data and field guy in 2016, or way before that in 2010, and then got back involved and started to do this stuff. There was data on how much, how many of Clinton's ads featured Trump speaking, right? And it was a lot of Trump saying horrible things that we think are horrible, but without the context, people just heard, like, like if you put up, there was one ad that we did that was a Lincoln Project ad that we tested. This is my least favorite research story. There was an ad that we tested that was like, a Lincoln Project ad that played a clip of the, like, they're bringing drugs, they're bringing rapists, some of them are good people, like the initial thing that he said. And we were interviewing this was in 2020, and we were interviewing this woman in like a nana in Florida, like a grandma who was married to an undocumented guy. And we, like, flipped back. It was a one-on-one interview, and we flipped back from this ad, and she was crying, and like the interviewer was like, "Oh God, I'm so sorry. Like, that was really racist. I'm sorry that we didn't warn you, at least, that was coming." And the woman is like sniffling, and she says, "It's not that it was racist. It's that he's right. So like
Ugh.
when you put things in an ad, like you got to be careful about what you're saying, because it's like, if it might be persuasive to people. In this case, obviously it worked inside this larger context, but it's just that there's that use of people's voice can be really, really tricky. And that's it kills me that worked so well, and that
Yeah.
it did have that narrative. Honestly, the one that was really deadly was the one that had the clip from the Breakfast Club too. And like, it's not to blame Charlemagne at all, because he was having a totally natural response to it, but that was a brutal ad too.
You have to just
Sorry,
remind.
the background, right? One of the
Yeah.
trans ads had an interview, or had a clip of an interview with Charlemagne the God, who is, for people who don't know, the main talent who runs a thing called the Breakfast Club, which is a huge, super well listened to, huge audience podcast, based in New York, big with Black people. Lots of people of all races listen to it. I think he has a very diverse audience. It's super compelling. Like it's
Right.
excellent. Like it's super well done. He's a great interviewer and funny, and smart.
But he
And
made the case that
yeah, he was like, yeah, I don't want my money to go to that. It was kind of a throwaway comment, right? Like, I think if somebody had sat down and like parsed it out with him, he would have been like, well, should this election really hinge on like the specifics of healthcare, prison system policy, health policy, right? Probably not, right? But it's just like that. That's what right-wing media is so good at, is deflecting the whole conversation around whatever issue they want. I mean, you can straight line from that to this week, where they, were able to get Tim Walz to step down because of this fraud thing, that's allegations that have been going on. Like there's the whole story is complicated, right? But it's government kind of doing what it's supposed to do. It's like, there was fraud, they caught the people, they're like trying to end it. It wasn't Walz's fault, but right-wing media was able to deflect this whole story and create this funhouse mirror effect, where it's like just the perspective gets all messed up, and they're really good at it. And that's why we're here.
Let's get back. I don't want to miss this hopeful note though, because signal 3 was that Democrats are far from doomed. And I'm
right.
I mean, yes, I am an optimistic person by nature. It is true. But that voters are very frustrated. But that unpopularity of Trump following his actions in 2025 has at least temporarily arrested the realignment of people or the theoretical realignment of mainly young voters and voters of color, and men of color specifically, towards Republicans. It's like, well, people were very frustrated and Democrats were in charge. And guess what? They're at least as frustrated, if not more frustrated now. And it turns out Republicans are in charge. So can you just talk a little bit more about, Democrats being far from doomed?
Yeah. There was some data today. Pew, I think, had the Dems plus Dem leaners versus Republicans and Republican leaners now is at +8 Democrats, which is like the most it's been like in at least a couple of decades, maybe ever. It's in that range. People's partisan identities shift around. Like it's like this is hard to deal with, right? But like when there's bad things going on and it's Republicans, like it's people shift away from it. There's thermostatic effect too, which is the effect of like when a party is in power, if there's ideas that are associated with them that people feel like are going poorly, like they shift the other direction. And like it's not a huge chunk of the electorate, but it's that middle 15-20%, like really don't have a stable partisan identity, and they do go back and forth. And some of it is paper thin. That's like a pollster calls and asks, and they're like, oh yeah, I'm more of a Democrat these days. Like it's not a deep and abiding, this is why we exist as organizers. We're trying to do that. But like, but that's, like it is better now than it's been, in a long time. That thermostatic effect is really, really kicking in. We don't know yet. There's more data. This is one of the things, is there's more data this year to gather about like what's really driving that, right? But we can guess, right? Like some of it is, the story that we've been trying to tell is like the rich over my lifetime, over the past 5-ish decades, have taken $79 trillion. This small it's not even the top 1%. It's like part of the 1% have taken $79 trillion from everybody else. Like, that's a lot of why people are frustrated, right? Like that inequality alone. Like when so many times, like when this is actually another strong, hopeful signal. When we went to people, a lot of times you ask at the beginning, you're like, how's things going for you economically? A lot of people, it would be mixed, right? Like people would be like, oh, I'm doing okay, or like we've been blessed. It's like we're comfortable. We hear that from people a lot. So you hear from people who are legitimately struggling too. It's 2/3, 1/3, something like that. And in person, people really answer that. I think in surveys, people are more like, oh no, I'm not doing well, right? But in person, they're a little more agreeable about it. It's funny. And like if you look at the macro data, right, it's like spending is up. People are spending a lot of money on stuff, right? It's like that's what's going on. But no one looks at this economy. No one looks at Elon Musk making $1 trillion and then the things he says on social media and says, this is an okay way for this to be. Nobody's looking at, God, here in Oakland, like we have such incredible wealth. And then like homeless people, like there's like, like it's just, you can't say like we're doing
10
fine.
communities. Yeah.
For so many people, that disparity is what's going on. And like, that is like, Kerry and I are both football fans. That is like when your offensive line is super good and you have a good running back, or your running back doesn't even need to be that good. They have created a huge reality, has created this huge hole right up the middle, right?
That's right.
Right over the left shoulder of the center, right there, and
that's
like
right.
we can't run that hole as a party that like how broken things are now.
I mean, give Dan and I a football.
We got to figure that out.
We couldn't make the secondary miss, but we could get through the initial hole.
One of the linebackers is going to come in and knock her head off. Like, that's fine. But like we can at least get 7 yards on this play, and that's all we need for the cycle.
That's right. 4 yards of play, and it's a first down. There you go.
That's right. Yeah, that's what my coach always told us too.
Yeah.
So that's it's I think the background economics story.
I will add that we did, and as people who have been tuned into us know, and so at the risk of being a broken record player, but we did probably on the year the most in-depth. We weren't the only people who looked at the skippers, the Biden skippers who had voted for Biden in 2020, but then sat out 2024. But we went back to the well on that a number of times in a number of different ways, qualitative, quantitative. We analyzed voting, we analyzed people who had done voter analysis, ballot verified voter analysis. So we did a lot on the skippers, and those those folks were not necessarily down on Democrats. They weren't like they were relatively, they were not inspired by what happened in 2024. And they also aren't news avoiders. The vast majority of them said, self-reported at a rate of like 70 some percent, 72%, I think, that they regularly check the news. So they're not like unreachable people who are completely checked out and whatever. These skippers, they were really not excited about the fact that there was no primary, and the economic message really didn't land for them. And those kind of two things, and then Democrats also weren't aligned with some of the movement, movement stuff that would have worked for younger voters, in particular on Gaza. And like just that host of things together, it was like, why vote?
Yeah. And that is, I mean, that was a big surprise in that study. And, because we looked at defectors across the board, we did do one particular study just because kind of nobody else had done it. It was a hard sample to find a little bit of just people who had voted for Biden and then skipped 24. That was sort of the keystone. I feel like that if you're going to read one study, go read that one. But yeah, they, and those people are like, they're a little more Bernie and AOC than like the sort of average Dem, right? Like they weren't, I'm not going to go out and say they were huge lefties and that they were like, that was their main thing. But like, even like the stuff about Gaza, it's like, because we did qualitative and quantitative, so we polled them, and Gaza did not really pop in the poll. There was another poll that IMEU did that where Gaza was like the number one issue, which I think is possible. But we did hear that a lot in qual, and I think what this gets at is something about salience, where like like if you just go out and ask people what's your most issue, for the most part people are going to say prices and economics and jobs, right? Because it's the thing they're thinking about most of the time. That doesn't mean that other stuff doesn't matter to them in their vote, right? Like there's like, if a pollster just asks what's the most salient issue, or is this important to you, is this not important to you, that's not going to necessarily drive your vote choice, because it goes in this narrative. And the narrative, for Harris was like, for good reason, people felt like that people who disagreed with her on Gaza were not getting a fair listen. And like, that was with the steady drumbeat of very real images that were coming across on social media, that was not an Iranian operation, as some people in our party have suggested, which is nuts. Like, real stuff was happening over there. It was actually being fairly well represented on social media. It was not being represented in corporate media. Like, those are real things. And that was legitimately frustrating and horrifying, honestly, to people. And that, like, the campaign it's blame ourselves, right? We wanted to make an ad about Gaza too at one point, and for a bunch of different reasons, we ended up not. It was a really hard story to tell. We didn't know what to tell voters about that. It was really frustrating. And that's it. But just on the baseline, sorry, to get back to hope, right? Like, the fact that those skippers,
as and we were saying about hope.
Totally right. Even I feel like Trump yesterday, and we're not even chatting on the internal chat for this, but like, I don't know if people saw this clip, but like, Marco Rubio hands Trump a note in the meeting with all the oil executives, the gross meeting, and Trump like reads it. He's like, "Oh, my little Marco has written me a note here." He just reads it out loud. It's an amazing quote. But like, to get back to hope, those people, they lean a little more lefty. Well, I think we can engage them again. We've got this huge opportunity, and like, look again, not to like disrespect our family member, our Democratic family members here, but like, moderating on cultural issues is not going to reach those people. We have to give them a reason to vote for us, and making an economy that works for more people and that fixes the crazy inequality that we're seeing. And equality and affordability is the same thing, right? Like, the reason we don't have money, the reason that's like, everything feels so strapped and so difficult, is because these people took $79 trillion. And that's, whether we blame billionaires or not, I don't even know if we need a bad guy, because we all voted for this, right? My parents were Republicans forever, and like, they voted for cutting tax on the rich. They thought Reagan was good. People did this for reasons. They're not evil. We just need to change the system.
Listen, this is the yearning for change, and systemic change is palpable in all of our research. I do not think that moderating is about, no one's going to look at ideological moderation and say, that's my person. They're going for the change I'm looking for. They want something bold, which is part of the reason, why, people were so drawn initially to the anti-oligarchy tour. And part of the reason, people are looking at what's going on with ICE and going, oh my God. And, showing up in the streets and saying, hey, this isn't okay. And, there are, in a hopeful way, there are plenty of movements for Democrats to tap into and be part of, and be, and sort of, jump in front of that parade and be like, yeah, we're on this. We agree.
Right. Or at least are aware, at least include, this is one of the things that Biden did really well, I feel like, was he made people who are involved in those, who are more involved, feel included. I felt included in his campaign. I felt represented. I felt like the ideas that he was talking about included me, and I did not feel that way from Harris. The thing about bold, I don't totally agree. We're totally out of time.
We are.
I think we should bookmark that, because I think this is, as we get into, one of the things that we're working on this year now is sort of the discussion of what does the offense look like, right? And I've seen negative reactions to bold, because that was the Elizabeth Warren approach, was like, we need a big, bold new vision. That kind of scares people, right? Sort of good reason.
It kind of scares people, but if you define what that is, when we were, I am gonna shut up soon. But when we were talking to Terrence,
this is interesting. This is like we've always said our Zoom calls would make actually like, you know, the podcast.
Dan always says that. I think people would be snoozeville about our Zoom calls. But anyway, I say that with love in my heart, Dan. But Terrence Woodbury is like, we need to build a new world. And in that world, this is part of his new world. The people have health care, and the people who get the most votes win. Okay. I want to ask you how many people you go to voters and say, now, do you think it's bold and crazy that the person who gets the most votes wins the presidency? And those people would say, no, that doesn't seem bold and crazy.
These things also, it's not solitaire, right? And that I think that, and this, I mean, this, okay, this is such a let's talk about it later. Because it is an interesting question, and I think we'll I love bookmarking this here to like have.
I do love bookmarking this here. We'll have this debate over the course of the next 15 episodes, and we invite you to join.
Totally. Right.
But in the meantime, so that you have a baseline, you could either just stop with listening to this and listening to Jan's sort of summary, or you could go over to Charting the Way Forward Substack. You could sign up for it, and you could read Towards Strength, which is, has all the signals that we just discussed, and all of the 10 research projects are summarized there. That's a good way to get in tune. Also, please follow us so we will pop up in your newsfeed. We are doing something a little different here. We are not sort of just sitting down and reacting to the news of the day. We are trying to very earnestly find a strategic path forward, and not just for the lefty part of, that's what people, I think, would want. Some of our frenemies would want you to believe that we're just looking for a lefty path forward. We are looking for a winning path forward, building a durable Democratic coalition that can win elections, for decades to come. And so anyway, we want you to follow us on that journey. But if you feel, if it's hard for you to tune in every day and see some of the horrors that are taking place, and trust me, I can say that for me personally, it is sometimes hard. It's not that we are completely hermetically sealed from what's going on, but it's not the outrages of the day that you're going to hear here. We're trying to find the strategies to put together a winning coalition that is rooted in engaged with the realities that we are all experiencing on a day-to-day basis. Dan, did you want to add anything?
Nope, it's great.
Okay, so join us. Come back. Join us on a weekly basis. Let's leave it there. Thank you, Dan Ancona. Fun for you and I to go back and forth, and me say one thing and you push back and me push back, and it's good. Yeah. And thank you to our listeners. Of course, we are not relevant without you. Let's link arms and gear up for what promises to be a challenging, but also, as we were discussing, it's a year with a lot of potential. And I also truly believe, especially based on just the first few weeks here, it is going to be a grind to get there, but there is hope, and we have to hang on to that. And with that, we will see you next Thursday. Until then, do good, be well, hug your loved ones, and please tell your dog I say hi.
Thanks, everybody.